By 1891, the company had lost nearly 40% of its regular business, though Coleman himself remained uncertain about exactly why his once thriving operation was faltering. "He searches for conspiracies in the wrong places," Catherine noted in her journal. "He suspects his competitors, his partners, even his own managers, everyone except the invisible woman who sorts his mail and schedules his appointments. I sit in his outer office 3 days each week, watching him grow increasingly desperate as everything he built crumbles around him, and he looks through me as if I don't exist." The final phase of Catherine's campaign represented her most audacious strategy. Having weakened Coleman financially and operationally, she now moved to deliver a killing stroke to his public reputation, the foundation of his remaining business relationships and social position. Through her years working at Peterson and Hammond, Catherine had methodically collected evidence of Coleman's numerous fraudulent practices. Falsified shipping manifests, bribes disguised as consulting fees, insurance claims for non-existent cargo losses, and most damaging of all, documentation of unsafe vessel operations that had resulted in preventable crew injuries and deaths. Rather than taking this evidence to authorities who might still be influenced by Coleman's remaining political connections, Catherine orchestrated its public exposure through multiple channels simultaneously. Key documents were provided to 3 different Philadelphia newspapers, ensuring that no single editor could suppress the story. Additional evidence was sent to business partners, social connections, and church leaders who had long accepted Coleman's public persona at face value. The resulting scandal erupted in November 1895, 13 years after Alexander Wright's death. The Philadelphia Sentinel's headline captured the public sentiment: "Coleman Empire built on fraud, respected businessman implicated in years of systematic deception." The evidence was too overwhelming and came from too many sources for Coleman to effectively refute. Business partners dissolved their relationships, banks called in loans, and social acquaintances publicly distanced themselves from the man they had previously celebrated. When criminal investigations began, many former associates rushed to make deals with prosecutors, providing additional testimony about Coleman's fraudulent practices in exchange for immunity. Marcus Coleman's final public appearance occurred on December 10, 1895, as he departed the federal courthouse following his indictment on 37 counts of fraud, bribery, and tax evasion. Photographers captured his haunted expression as he pushed through a crowd of former friends and business associates who now stared at him with undisguised contempt. That evening, Coleman returned to his increasingly empty mansion on Philadelphia's prestigious Rittenhouse Square. His wife and children had already relocated to relatives' homes in Boston, attempting to escape the scandal that had destroyed their social standing. Servants had departed as their wages went unpaid, leaving the once imposing residence silent and cold. According to police reports, Coleman spent his final hours writing letters, apologies to family members, pleas for understanding to former friends, and practical instructions regarding his few remaining unencumbered assets. Shortly after midnight, he took his own life with a revolver that had been a gift from Judge Hartnett years earlier during happier times. The official narrative of Marcus Coleman's downfall attributed his destruction to the inevitable exposure of long-standing fraudulent practices. Financial experts described it as a textbook case of unsustainable business operations finally collapsing under their own weight. Social commentators viewed it as a morality tale about the consequences of placing appearance above substance. No one connected the systematic destruction of Coleman's empire to Catherine Wright, who continued working at Peterson and Hammond for another 6 months before quietly resigning her position. The clerical worker who had sat in Coleman's outer office for years, witnessing his growing desperation while methodically orchestrating his destruction, simply disappeared from Philadelphia without fanfare or notice. Her journal, discovered decades later in a trunk sold at auction in Boston, provides the only complete account of what she herself described as the longest business negotiation in history, the full repayment of my father's stolen life. The final entry, dated January 15, 1896, reveals that Catherine viewed Coleman's suicide with neither satisfaction nor remorse, but rather as the closing of accounts. The debt is settled. Not through the quick violence he visited upon my father, but through the slow, methodical dismantling of everything he valued. He experienced the complete destruction of his business, his reputation, his family relationships, and finally his hope, exactly what he inflicted upon others throughout his life. My father believed that business conducted honorably benefits everyone. Marcus Coleman proved the corollary. Business conducted dishonorably eventually destroys everyone it touches, including those who practice it. The difference is merely one of timing. Catherine Wright never returned to Philadelphia. Historical records indicate she eventually settled in Chicago under her mother's maiden name, establishing a small but successful investment firm that specialized in assisting women managing inheritances or divorce settlements. She never married, though she maintained close relationships with her godchildren and supported numerous charitable organizations focused on educational opportunities for women. She died in 1942 at the age of 79, having witnessed America's transformation through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. Her obituary in the Chicago Tribune described her as a pioneering businesswoman known for her exceptional integrity and patient approach to financial matters, a fitting epitaph for someone who had demonstrated those qualities in ways her contemporaries never fully understood. The story of Catherine Wright's methodical revenge represents something more profound than simple retribution. It illustrates how power operates in complex social systems, and how those dismissed as powerless may create influence through patience, observation, and strategic thinking. In an era when women were systematically excluded from business and legal authority, Catherine created alternative pathways to justice that utilized rather than challenged the very limitations meant to constrain her. This remarkable case shows us that sometimes justice operates on a different timeline than we expect, working quietly through the same systems that initially facilitated injustice. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe and the notification bell to hear more dark historical mysteries in our next video. Leave a comment letting us know which aspect of Catherine's revenge you found most impressive: her patience, her strategic thinking, or her ability to remain invisible while orchestrating such elaborate justice. I'll be reading your thoughts in the comments section. Her entries grew increasingly concerned as the engagement celebration approached, though she couldn't yet understand the true scope of the danger she faced. November 15th dawned cold and clear, with a sharp wind blowing off Charleston harbor that seemed to penetrate the very walls of Riverside Hall. The sky was pale blue, and the marsh grass surrounding the plantation had turned golden with the first frost of the season. Catherine woke before dawn, not from excitement about her engagement celebration, but from a recurring nightmare that had plagued her for weeks. The dream was always the same. She found herself trapped in a dark, confined space while voices she recognized discussed her fate in whispers just beyond her hearing. She would wake with her nightgown damp with perspiration, her heart racing as if she had been running for her life. This morning, the dream had been more vivid than ever, and Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow prophetic. As her maid helped her into the blue silk gown that had been made specially for the occasion, Catherine noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. The dress seemed unusually heavy, and when she examined it more closely, she discovered that someone had sewn small lead fishing weights into the hem and sleeves. The weights were carefully concealed but detectable to her trained seamstress's eye. When she questioned her maid about this unusual modification, the girl's face went pale and she stammered that Mr. Jonathan had ordered it to make the dress hang more elegantly. But the explanation made no sense. The weights made the dress heavier and more cumbersome, not more elegant. Catherine filed this detail away in her mind, adding it to the growing list of things about this celebration that seemed wrong. The afternoon celebration proceeded smoothly in the main parlor of Riverside Hall, attended by 63 guests from Charleston's most prominent families. The room had been decorated with late autumn flowers and palmetto fronds, creating a festive atmosphere that contrasted with Catherine's growing unease. The engagement was announced formally by her father, and toasts were offered with the family's finest Madeira wine. Catherine noticed that Daniel seemed unusually nervous, his hands shaking as he raised his glass and his voice cracking when he spoke of their future together. Her father appeared distracted, checking his pocket watch repeatedly and engaging in whispered conversations with Marcus and Dr. Haynes. Judge Crawford stood near the back of the room, his expression grave as he observed the proceedings. During the celebration dinner, Catherine overheard fragments of conversation that increased her alarm. Guests were discussing travel plans with unusual urgency, and several mentioned being called away on business the following day. It seemed like an odd coincidence that so many people would need to leave Charleston immediately after her engagement party. It was during the after-dinner entertainment, as guests gathered in the drawing room for music and cards, that Catherine overheard the conversation that revealed the full horror of their plan. She had stepped into the adjacent library to retrieve a book of poetry when she heard her father's voice through the thin wall that separated the library from his study. "The river location is perfect," her father was saying. "The current will carry her far enough downstream that the body won't be found for weeks, if at all. By then, the lead weights will have done their work, and it will appear she drowned herself in despair over some imaginary scandal we'll create." Daniel's voice was shaky with nervousness. "Are you certain she won't be missed too quickly? Someone might raise an alarm before we can establish our story." "That's why we're doing this tonight," Marcus replied. "Tomorrow is Sunday, and most people will assume she's simply indisposed after the excitement of the engagement. By Monday, when people expect to see her, we'll have spread word that she's run away with a lover, bringing shame on the family." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. They were planning to murder her. Her own father, her fiancé, and her uncle were conspiring to kill her for her inheritance money. The engagement celebration, the rushed courtship, Daniel's entire presence in her life, everything had been an elaborate deception designed to gain access to her uncle's legacy. Catherine forced herself to continue listening as they discussed the details of her murder. They planned to wait until late evening when the guests would be intoxicated and distracted by entertainment. Daniel would suggest a romantic walk along the river to view the moonlight, and once they were alone by the water, the other conspirators would join them. Dr. Haynes would administer a dose of laudanum to make her drowsy, and then they would simply push her into the Ashley River, where the lead weights sewn into her dress would ensure she sank immediately. Fighting panic, Catherine realized that her only chance of survival lay in understanding their complete plan and finding a way to turn it against them. She learned that they had been preparing for weeks, studying the river currents and tides to ensure her body would be carried far from the plantation. They had also created a fictional lover, a traveling merchant who had supposedly swept Catherine off her feet and convinced her to abandon her family and fiancé. When the conversation ended, Catherine forced herself to return to the celebration and play the role of happy bride-to-be while her mind raced through possible escape plans. She was surrounded by 63 potential witnesses, but most were family friends who trusted her father implicitly. Even if she tried to expose the conspiracy, who would believe such an incredible accusation against 3 of Charleston's most respected men? As the evening progressed and the guests became more intoxicated on her father's wine, Catherine noticed the conspirators positioning themselves strategically around the house. Jonathan remained visible in the main entertainment areas, establishing his alibi. Marcus engaged guests in animated conversations that would provide witnesses to his presence. Dr. Haynes circulated among the ladies, discussing their health concerns in his professional capacity, while Judge Crawford spoke with the gentlemen about legal and political matters. Around 10 o'clock, as the celebration reached its peak and the guests were thoroughly distracted by music and wine, Daniel approached Catherine with a charming smile she now recognized as the expression of a predator preparing to strike. "My dear Catherine," he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "the moonlight on the river is particularly beautiful tonight. Would you care to take a short walk before the evening ends?" Catherine felt her heart begin to race, but she forced herself to appear calm. "I'm quite comfortable here with our guests," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her terror. "Nonsense," Daniel insisted, his grip on her arm tightening in a way that appeared affectionate to observers but felt threatening to Catherine. "A few minutes of fresh air will be refreshing after the warmth of the house." Several nearby guests overheard this exchange and murmured encouragement. "What a romantic notion," commented Mrs. Henderson, an elderly family friend. "Young couples should take advantage of such beautiful evenings." Catherine realized that Daniel was determined to execute the plan regardless of her protests. Any further resistance would only alert the other guests to something wrong. She would have to go along with his suggestion and hope she could find some way to escape or summon help once they were outside. As they moved toward the French doors that opened onto the riverside terrace, Catherine noticed the other conspirators smoothly moving into position. Marcus appeared at her other side, ostensibly to bid them good night. Dr. Haynes began a loud discussion with guests near the front of the house, ensuring their attention would be focused away from the river. Jonathan remained visible in the main parlor, establishing his presence with multiple witnesses. They stepped out onto the terrace, where the cold November air immediately penetrated Catherine's silk gown. The moon was indeed bright, casting silver light across the Ashley River and illuminating the wooden dock that extended into the dark water. Daniel guided her toward the river path, his hand firm on her arm as they walked away from the warmth and safety of the house. "The water looks so peaceful tonight," Daniel said, but his voice carried an undertone of nervousness that confirmed Catherine's worst fears. Behind them, she could hear footsteps on the gravel path and realized that the other conspirators were following at a discreet distance. When they reached the dock, Catherine made her desperate move. Instead of allowing herself to be positioned near the water's edge where they could easily push her in, she suddenly broke free from Daniel's grip and ran toward the river's edge, shouting at the top of her lungs. "Help me! Murder! They're trying to kill me for my inheritance. Daniel Pierce is not who he claims to be." Her voice, trained by years of singing in the church choir, carried clearly across the water and back toward the house. The conspirators lunged toward her simultaneously, but Catherine had positioned herself strategically. The heavy lead weights in her dress, instead of hindering her movement as intended, became weapons. She swung her weighted sleeves like clubs, striking Daniel across the face with enough force to send him stumbling backward into Dr. Haynes. Marcus reached her first, trying to clamp his hand over her mouth to stop her screaming, but Catherine bit down hard enough to draw blood. His cry of pain echoed across the water as she broke free and continued her strategic shouting, moving along the riverbank to project her voice toward different parts of the house. Jonathan Whitmore is bankrupt. He's trying to murder his own daughter. Send for the sheriff. Inside the house, the guests had begun to notice that something was wrong. Catherine's screams carried clearly through the November air, and several people moved toward the windows and doors to investigate the disturbance. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, had heard the commotion from the kitchen and was already running toward the terrace with several other servants. Judge Crawford, realizing that their carefully planned conspiracy was unraveling, struck Catherine across the temple with a heavy walking stick, causing her to collapse to the wooden dock. Blood trickled down her face, staining her blue silk gown, but she remained conscious and continued calling for help whenever possible. "Quickly!" Jonathan hissed, appearing at the edge of the dock with rope and the laudanum Dr. Haynes had prepared. "Some of the guests are coming outside." But it was too late. Mrs. Patterson reached the dock first, followed by Reverend Samuel Morrison, who had performed Catherine's baptism years earlier. The scene they discovered left no doubt about what had been planned. Catherine, her dress bloodied and torn, pointing accusingly at 4 men who stood over her with rope, laudanum, and clear evidence of violent intentions. "Reverend Morrison," Catherine called out, her voice hoarse from screaming but filled with relief. "Thank God you came. They planned to murder me tonight. They weighted my dress so I would drown in the river. Daniel married me to steal my inheritance." The evidence was impossible to deny. The lead weights sewn into Catherine's dress, the rope and drugs in the conspirators' possession, and Catherine's obvious injuries all supported her desperate accusations. Dr. Haynes, faced with the collapse of their scheme and his own medical reputation, broke down completely. "I never wanted this," he sobbed. "I only agreed to provide a death certificate. I never thought they would actually. I'm a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm." His confession opened the floodgates. Marcus, realizing that his legal career was finished regardless, began revealing details of the conspiracy in a desperate attempt to minimize his own culpability. The full scope of the plot emerged as each conspirator tried to save himself by implicating the others. Jonathan had indeed been embezzling from business partners and using Catherine's inheritance as collateral for loans he couldn't repay. Daniel was a wanted criminal fleeing fraud charges in Georgia under his real name of David Patterson. Marcus had been disbarred in Virginia for similar inheritance schemes, and his gambling debts had made him desperate enough to participate in murder. Dr. Haynes had been selling laudanum illegally, and Judge Crawford had been taking bribes to influence legal decisions for years. Catherine, despite her injuries and trauma, insisted on remaining at the scene to ensure that evidence was preserved and witness statements properly recorded. She had survived an attempt on her life through intelligence, courage, and desperate determination, and she was not about to let legal technicalities allow her would-be murderers to escape justice. The engagement celebration had transformed into a criminal investigation that would become the scandal of the decade in Charleston society. Letters were immediately dispatched to Savannah and Richmond, where Daniel's true identity would be confirmed and additional charges awaited him under his real name. By dawn, what had begun as a celebration of Catherine's future had become a testament to her survival instincts and the power of truth to overcome even the most carefully planned deception. The conspiracy to murder Catherine Whitmore failed not because of outside intervention, but because the intended victim herself refused to cooperate with her own execution. The case would become a precedent in South Carolina courts, leading to new laws requiring multiple witnesses for inheritance transfers and stricter oversight of estate attorneys. Catherine's refusal to become a victim had not only saved her life, but helped protect other vulnerable young women from similar schemes. What started as a celebration of love became a story of betrayal, survival, and the lengths people will go to for money. The weighted dress that was meant to drag Catherine to the bottom of the Ashley River instead became evidence that exposed one of Charleston's most elaborate murder conspiracies. Let us know in the comments what you think about this incredible story of survival and betrayal. If you enjoyed this dark tale from American history, Subscribe and share with someone who loves historical mysteries. We'll see you in the next video.